Hey there, Dr. Alan Christensen here with you. I want to talk about how the paleo diet isn't paleo. This has been a big trend. 2013 it really spiked. It's slowed down, but it's still a big prevalent idea. And I've looked at the history of this paleo movement. There's some really good points behind that, but a few things that I'd like to point out that I'm concerned about, in which it's missing the boat. So the general idea of the caveman diet, so to speak, goes back to roughly the 60s and 70s. And there was a book written by a researcher who argued that early humans lived mostly off of animal protein. That was not borne out, and that was discredited as to be invalid science. What happened more recently was in the 80s, concluding in the 90s, a researcher named Lindeberg studied caveman populations. And this was a group near New Guinea, and these were people that were actually horticulturists, meaning that they were farmers, not agriculturists, so not plows, but using more so just plant propagation. They would plant roots and take hybrids from roots and plant those elsewhere. So they were planters, not farmers, but planters. They weren't hunter-gatherers, they were horticulturists. And what he did was he compared their health to that of modern Swedes. He was a Swedish gentleman himself. What he saw was that amongst thousands of people that were tracked for over a decade, they actually had a big thing working against them is that they smoked. 76% of the women and 80% of the men smoked. But yet their rates of heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, obesity, high lipids, non-existent. They had almost no cardiovascular problems. It was just dramatic and surprising. They were lean. They were so much leaner and smaller body mass index than similar controls this man looked at. And he wrote about this. So this research was taken by Laurent Cordain in the book he titled The Paleo Diet of 2010. And most would argue that Laurent Cordain's book launched this modern paleo movement. So what did the catavans do? How are they eating? And they were active. They weren't doing marathons, but they had less time spent being sedentary. There was that. But their diets were pretty dramatic. Their diets were very high carb, very low fat. It was 69% carbohydrate, roughly 21% fat, 10% protein. And the carbohydrate they were consuming came from the tubers they were propagating. So this was cassava, manioc, sweet potatoes of sorts, various tubers, plantains, more tropical type carbohydrate. That was the biggest portion of their diet by far. They were lean, they had good dental structure, they were free of acne, which was noticed, and they were free of heart disease. Now, the paleo modern movement, it took a big zigzag right from the very start. So Laurent Cordain, in this book, he cited the catavans over and over again as an example of this pre-modern culture living in excellent health. And many have argued they were the best studied pre-modern culture to date. But then Laurent advocated what he called this modern paleo diet. He advocated a diet that was 23% carbohydrate and 39, roughly 40% fat. So the catavan diet was 70%, 69, 70% carbohydrate. Laurent's was 23% carbohydrate. The catavans ate 20% fat. Laurent advocated 40% fat. That was a pretty big disconnect. The catavans also did not consume heavy, fatty mammal meat on a regular basis at all. They definitely did consume game meat. They did have poultry. They had some seafood in their diet. Honestly, not a huge amount because their protein intake was about 10%. But Laurent advocated a diet higher in mammal meat and animal proteins. And it was a pretty stark contrast from the actual diet of the catavans. So that was the big wrinkle. Now, the other funny thing I thought about with this is that all the research on real paleo cultures showed that their average lifespan was 30 to 35. If I was a paleo dude, I would be like a great grandpa or something, or like hopefully an esteemed elder. But to be a man close to 50, early 50s, would be extremely unusual. Now, they died mostly from trauma. There was a lot of tribal warfare, but also quite commonly from starvation and also from just food poisons. They didn't have refrigerators. They had a lot of food that they weren't sure what was safe in all circumstances, and a lot of the food they had was old and aged and had bacteria on that. They also had many rates of death from infectious disease, infectious process. So yes, it's true that they really did lack chronic disease, but the reason they lacked chronic disease is because no one got old enough to have a heart attack. They simply didn't have enough of the population past the age in which chronic disease comes on to see it emerge. So we don't think that they really had some big difference that prevented it. It was more so a lack of just possible aging. The catawbans, however, did have a low enough rate of infection and a low rate of infant mortality to where they had many people of adulthood age and many in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they were remarkably free of chronic disease at the same age in which it would show up in the modern world. And again, their diets were not at all like what the modern paleo diets are, ironically. So oddly enough, I've also thought that maybe if you really were in the paleo world, the diet would be a good fit because maybe you needed to, I don't know, perhaps the relevance of chronic disease was just not there. They didn't get old enough for that, so a diet that cut the risk of chronic disease might not be important. So, but I always want to move more towards outcomes and less on just speculation. So what do we really know about the paleo diet? What have we got data from research? Well, as of the time of this video, there have been 6 studies done. None were long-term. They were all for brief periods of times, a few weeks. The longest that I saw, I believe, was 8 weeks. And here's the thing, every one of those studies showed some benefit in terms of weight loss, better blood sugar control. And a few of the studies even compared the same people against control diets, like more modern diets, and they did better. But here's the big wrinkle. Not one of those studies was done comparing the same number of calories on a paleo diet as the same number of calories on the contrasting diet. So every single one of those 6 studies, the people were on a lower calorie paleo diet. They were consuming anywhere between 300 to 900 calories less per day than the group they were contrasting. So basically, 10 people on a paleo diet, 10 people on a different form of a diet, and these people had lost more weight. But they were also consuming fewer calories. And we've seen this time and time again that in the short term, anything you do that lowers calories can cause weight loss and improve blood sugar. But that doesn't always correlate with long-term health, and that doesn't point towards a superior diet. In fact, the most dramatic example I can think of was a gentleman who did the Twinkie diet. He ate Twinkies and Doritos and Little Debbie snack cakes at a 750 calorie deficit for 8 weeks. And he showed the same things, weight loss, better blood sugar. So in a short period of time, a lower calorie diet can change certain metrics. That doesn't mean it's going to be good for you long term. And so far, that's all the data we have on the paleo diet, is that if it's a low calorie paleo diet, then you'll lose weight from that. There was an old joke that used to be around to where it would say, this card plus $1 will get you a free cup of coffee at Joe's Diner. And the joke was that coffee was $1 at Joe's Diner, so the card was actually worthless. So it's kind of like that. If you do a diet that's 750 calories below your target, well, that diet can make you lose weight. But you would have lost weight anyway, even on a bad diet. And honestly, it may turn out that these diets could be better. There could be science. You could design a study to show that. You would need thousands and thousands of people, and you would need decades and decades. You have to track their rates of chronic disease. Until then, the largest bodies of evidence point towards groups like the catawbans, or those on the Mediterranean diets, or those on rural Asian diets, or the Tsiane from South America. We've seen these populations lead long lives that have dramatically lower rates of chronic disease than we have in the modern world. And their diets are nothing like the modern paleo diets. The big irony is that the diet and the research that inspired the paleo movement, that diet is probably a really good diet to model and move towards, but that's not what came out from the book that made it popular. Dr. Christensen here with you. Take great care. I'll be back in really soon. Bye-bye.